episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Welcome again, everybody, to another episode of our show with another really fascinating guest for you today, helping to create a better tomorrow, not just for us, but for all of our animal friends. Today we have the honor of being joined by Aaron Schacht, who is currently the Executive Vice President of Innovation, Regulatory, and Business Development at Elanco, which is an American pharmaceutical company. It specializes in both medicines and vaccines for pets and livestock, and up until 2019 was a subsidiary of the Eli Lilly Company. Prior to this, Aaron held a role of Global Brand Development Leader in pain in Lilly Biomedicines. He was the global leader at the time for product development and commercialization activities for their novel CGRP neutralizing antibody, a novel treatment for the prevention of migraine and cluster headaches. In 2012, Aaron joined Lilly Biomedicines as a senior advisor in strategy and business development. His responsibilities there included oversight for therapeutic strategy development, R&D portfolio management, and business development. Past roles have included serving as executive director, global external R&D at Eli Lilly, where it was responsibility for implementation of a wide range of strategies for external partnerships. He's also served as Executive Director of Lilly Research Labs, Strategy, Portfolio Management, and Project Management, where he's responsible for strategic planning, R&D portfolio, and project management there as well. Prior to that, he was Director of the Innovation Center at eLilly organization. And he's also held roles as Managing Director of Lilly University, Director of Knowledge Management, and Manager of Strategy and Productivity for Discovery Research. In 2002, he took a short leave from Lilly and went off to the startup world, where he was the president and CEO of Artisan Therapeutics in Gaithersburg, Maryland. Aaron started his career at Lilly back in 1990, originally as a medicinal chemist, spent 5 years in the lab, working on various discovery programs from drugs for cardiovascular disorders, and he has a background in organic chemistry from the University of Illinois. With that introduction, Aaron Schacht, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Thank you, Ira. It's a real privilege to be here.
It's great having you, and it's interesting because typically, we haven't focused much on the show in sort of this area that's in between what the public sees a lot in terms they hear a lot about the R&D that goes on in pharma. Obviously, they see the commercial products, but you have occupied this really unique component of everything in between, the sort of all the business development and the integration that goes on between those two poles. Take a couple of minutes just to talk a little bit about your career a little further and sort of how you found this to be sort of your sweet spot in the pharma industry.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. And honestly, I've always been a bit of a nerd when it comes to science. Growing up as a child, I was very interested in science. Actually, when I started college, I wanted to be a journalist, but I wanted to write about science. So I started my career my college education as a journalism major. I actually got placed in the chemistry for chemistry majors because of my placement exam scores. And it was that first chemistry class at University of Illinois for the chemistry majors that I really got turned on to. Well, maybe this science thing is something more meaningful to me than just writing about it. Maybe it's something I should do. And actually, so I changed majors believing that starting in chemistry and shifting to journalism later might be easier than starting in journalism and shifting to chemistry or some other deep science later. So proved to be a good idea at the time. Enjoyed getting the background in chemistry, starting my career at Lilly. And really, I was a lab scientist, a medicinal chemist for 5 years. I think I had an opportunity to move outside the lab and really start to look at the process of R&D as opposed to the content of R&D. And that really opened my mind to really the notion that, the innovation paradigm in life sciences was really this evolutionary thing, right? That manifested out of really research institution thinking. If you think about it, let's put a bunch of people in a building, give them a bunch of money and hope good things come out. And I think, what I came to appreciate, I think through the lens of a big pharma company, is that there really wasn't an innovation productivity challenge or problem that the industry hadn't really acknowledged or taken on at face value. The methods by which we did things, the collaborations, and the robustness of them across the enterprise inside a large pharma, even the partnering strategies were all clandestine, ad hoc. and not really driven by any sort of theory of what the business ought to look like to support all of that. And so that just became, in many ways, the axis upon which I really leveraged the rest of my career experience, was really learning about how to integrate the science side and the business side in business models that made sense given the environmental conditions. If we think about what was transpiring in the 90s, I mean, this was the advent of combinatorial chemistry, the idea that you could automate the production of many different molecules. I think what nobody actually appreciated, though, is that a lot of those molecules were very similar to each other. So it wasn't actually solving the right problem. It was creating more molecules, which was something that sounded good. But if you didn't learn more from each molecule, you weren't really creating the potential for greater and more improved discovery. So those kinds of insights really led me to, focus on what was really happening underneath the surface of how to create innovation, how to learn from that, and then use that to amplify, in essence, in my case, the prospects of Eli Lilly and Company to generate more innovation.
And, continue along those lines, because, obviously, we think of what's a big pharma, and we have a vision of it. Maybe most of the public doesn't know as much about big animal pharma. And in this case, okay, so here's Elanco, was part of Lilly. Now it's part of a giant company, but it's its own giant company now. Some of the areas you're involved in terms of drugs, nutritional products, proteins, sound quite similar. Then there's the other areas that anti-parasite projects and so forth. Not as familiar, but nonetheless huge markets that maybe we don't always think about. Talk a little bit about your overlap there in terms of how your learnings at Lilly and working on the human side got you ready for animal pharma, and at the same time maybe some surprises that hit you when you got into animal pharma. You're like, well, this is a little different than I thought.
Yeah, it's great. So I think the basic prospects of discovery in life sciences are the same. There is some biological phenomenon that you want to understand. Could be a disease process in animals or humans. If you look let's say on the crop side, it's some sort of growth, inhibition or challenge to growth for plants. But the concept that there's some biological phenomenon that we can deduce or understand, and that leads to an insight that we could perturb that in some way that creates a beneficial effect. Right? In humans, it's dealing with symptoms of disease or underlying causes of disease. In animals, on the pet side, it's very similar to human medicine, right? You've got some challenge that's making the well-being of this animal a lot different than what it should be. But on the livestock side, it dawned on me one day that really what we're trying to help these animals do is realize their genetic potential. Yep. And we don't talk about that the same way we think about treating disease. But again, it reduces to what's the biological phenomenon that's inhibiting them realizing their genetic potential, an environmental challenge, let's say infectious pathogen, or some mechanism by which how the animals are being husbanded, right? They're under stress because of how they're treated on the farm or whatever. They don't grow as well. So really getting the insights into what's the underlying disease, right, or dysbiosis. And how do we do something to reverse that or affect that in a meaningful way? So that concept was the same. I think for the other learning that comes from animal health is realizing that animal health was really a derivative industry. It derived from taking innovation from the human side, antibiotics, and saying, would they work in animals? And would that be useful in animals, right? Or from the crop science side, right, ectoparasite, drugs, and would that work to protect an animal from a flea or a tick? So the first 50 years of animal health was all derivative from other industries. I think we're entering an era now where animal health is becoming its own standalone, and we're innovating in animal health for animal health is what I like to say. Whereas in the past we were innovating in other areas and then figured out how to use in animal health. And so we're seeing the evolution of a new industry, maybe is a way to look at it, and it's growing. The established players have exited their big pharma parents or their crop science parents and either merged or combined or gone public in some meaningful way to create much more concentrated focus in animal health. We get the opportunity with all of that transformation to sort of maybe reinvent business models or even the innovation model. And that's something that I found quite interesting and exciting in the journey in animal health, is how do we take what we learn from human pharma or biotech and not replicate those models that then give way to better models later, but just leapfrog a little bit. It's kind of like cell phones in China, right? Some people never had a phone until they got a cell phone. Well, animal health doesn't have to adopt an older human pharma model only to see it transform into something that, you know, is contemporary. We can basically start more from scratch and get it right on the first go here.
And you know, offline we had chatted when we were talking a little about this derivative concept, and you know, as you were saying, it's not just, hey, we got this decent anti-inflammatory here, let's see what it does to the pig joint or whatever. You're working with some really comprehensive biotech products here that in cancer and so forth that are really, well, sort of when you think of the cutting edge stuff that's happening in human pharma now, you're deriving really advanced products for animal health. Talk a little bit about some of those examples, if you would.
Yeah, so I think the history is, you know, if you think about how just on the human pharma side, we qualify a product from a safety standpoint as we go look at it in dogs, right? Yeah. So obviously there's a tremendous history of taking product concepts that were designed for human intervention, testing them in dogs, and then asking the question, well, shouldn't this be a drug in dogs? Good examples of that. One of the challenges with discovery in animal health is there's not a lot of literature, right, around the etiology and the pathobiology of disease in animals. Because more often what we do on the human side is we create a model of human disease by, in essence, infecting or injuring in some way an animal and saying, how does that simulate the symptom set or the underlying biological process in humans? So we're learning about a model of disease for humans and animals, not about disease in animals nearly as much. So that creates a new challenge. But at the same time, if you look at the way scientific understanding is opening wide with, you know, getting to genome level understanding about, you know, how disease manifests, we now can actually create really literature-worthy databases of what happens in an animal when they have atopic dermatitis at a gene and, you know, cellular level, what happens in an animal at the joint level. So we're now opening ourselves up to that new understanding, but we've got all this learning on the human side where we know certain things have worked and now we can apply it more specifically. So I think there's a bit of a renaissance that's beginning in animal health where as I said, we're innovating on purpose in animals, but we're doing it in the context of animal disease, not some other representation of it. And it's very exciting. So examples here, well, one great example is certain immunological targets are more relevant in animal disease than they are in human disease, even though there might be a translation or a mapping. But developing a monoclonal antibody, for example, for IL-31, which has led to the first ever product in animal health as a monoclonal antibody. Well, there's no analog on the human side of that. So that's a novel, new molecular entity strategy in animal health that didn't have a direct product analog on the human side. Different interleukins relative to the role in skin disease was already there, but it turns out that the role of IL-31 in itching in dogs is quite prominent, and therefore a very addressable target, and it's proven to be a tremendous product. Obviously, as it relates to things that are specific to animals themselves on the livestock side, obviously, you know, gut health and infections and all of that is just novel learning about what happens in the microbiome of a you know, the rumen is very different than your digestive system or tract. So there's fundamental learnings about what happens in the rumen of a cow that doesn't translate readily to what happens even to a pig or a chicken for that matter. So we do have these unique zones where the science is helping us unlock what's going on there, and then we can, in essence, engineer product opportunities that are specific to that biological understanding.
Really exciting.
Yeah.
And when and so you know, I'm a startup guy, and I come up with some interesting idea in animal pharma. Ultimately, I come to the Aaron Schachts of the world to evaluate this, and hopefully the Elancos of the world will partner with me and so forth. You know, as I mentioned in the opening, despite, you know, all the time you spend in pharma now in animal health, you also did take a little detour during your career where you got involved in startup and worked at that level. I'm just interested in sort of some of your experiences there and how your startup experiences helped you now for some of these new roles in dealing with startups on both sides of the table, because it's a very different position, obviously, than at that time, you know, limited resources, limited amount of programs. But talk a little about your startup experience and how that benefited. And would you recommend, do you recommend to some of the folks that you work with, hey, you should probably leave for a couple of years and learn what it's like to be in a small business and then come back?
Yeah. So, I start first with an overall mental model that, any innovation comes from the convergence of three different kinds of capital, right? Intellectual capital, which is the idea or the invention, the concept that is the basis for a product. Human capital, the people who actually came up with that and are the ones necessary to take it forward to prove it could be a product. And financial capital. Somebody's got to pay the bills and take the risk. And so I think as I think about my interactions as a large company player with smaller company players, very typically what a small company will have is they typically, if they're investment worthy, if they've got a really good idea and at least some of the human capital necessary to exploit it, right? And obviously they go to somebody else to get the money, venture, right? A venture fund. Where Elanco would come in that relationship is what other ideas and human capital as well as financial capital can we bring to that party and make it better than they could on their own, and that then serves as the basis for a deal. So it's important to be very clear about what they bring, what we bring, and be open about the idea that you can get all three of those kinds of capitals from different sources, right? The traditional I guess pharma model was I owned all three. I had all the people, I had all the ideas, I had all the money. Sure. But I think we've learned with the venture industry that, it's about the ecosystem that you're operating in as opposed to the model you exercise, I think is more important to keep in mind. And then I say that because it helps us maintain the right attitude toward what we see when a small company comes. And we can really sort of break down the weakness in a small company into one of three dimensions. How good is their idea? How good are their people? And do they have enough money? Right. Yep. And it's when we know those things that we can engage with them on where we can help, how us coming together is going to be better than the two companies working separately or apart. And then in the end, we got to serve the interests of investors. Yep. Elanco has investors, the small company has investors. It's got to be value accreting, right, in that setting relative to whatever norms, standards, and metrics we have. But that's the important thing. So and there are things that happen in a small company environment that unfortunately doesn't happen in a large company environment. Some of it is intentional. They have a much more willingness to accept risk, and they're using capital that's comfortable with that level of risk, right? As a publicly traded company, we work in a different risk envelope. We've got to make sure we deliver quarter by quarter sales and earnings, and with pipeline flows with great reliability. And as such, we can't take wild swings at things. And so we need these small companies to explore those things. And there's a beneficial relationship there. But at the same time, you pay a lot more for success in that setting than you would at Elanco, right? Yep. You also pay a lot more for failure. And since we only look at one company at a time, we sort of ignore the idea that for every one company that might come to us with something we could partner on, there were probably 9 or 10 others that got started that never made it to the point where they became relevant to us. Got it. And somebody else is footing the bill for all that, right? So the key is how do you just make sure that you see this startup as a precious opportunity. They might have the next big product that we couldn't have access to otherwise. And even if they don't have the best quality systems, and maybe they haven't done all of the things we wouldn't have done, it's dangerous to discount them because you could be missing out on the thing they do have that you don't, and that's that wonderful idea. Right. Or they may have a unique talent that is going to unlock that opportunity in a way someone at Elanco just couldn't. So we try to stay humble about that and recognize, and our model is designed to accommodate both internal and external and have sort of more of a seamless interface there. I think we practice that at a pretty high level, but I'm sure we could always get better. But my own personal experience, humbling experience of being out raising money is getting people to listen to your pitch and take it seriously. Right. A lot of times the experience is I've seen 5 of these. Why is yours different? Right. And what they want is a simple answer. And there's typically never a simple answer. It's in the nuance that things become different. And that's why you got to be careful about how aggressively you are with conforming to process for innovating as well. Yep. Because the variability in an idea is the unique source of its value. It's also what makes it complicated when it comes to process variability. Right? I need a different unit of work for that project than I need for this one. Well, that's inefficiency. No, it's not. that's focused on value creation,
Right.
not in it. So I tend to keep an open mind about lots of ways to get the job done. They have their way, we have our way. Let's find the synergy in that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Aaron, we've talked a little bit about biologics, drugs, a little bit that you mentioned on the nutrition and sort of increasing animal performance. You're also, at Elanco in the vaccine business, and I was just, and obviously, if this is anything confidential, we could move on to something else. But obviously, a lot of the big pharma brothers and sisters that were in the vaccine business have been off making COVID vaccines the last couple of years. Any interesting projects that have come your way in the last couple of years? Obviously, there's been so much talk about animals as like these intermediary vectors between bats and the rest of the world. Sure. Did you get a lot of pitches in 2020, 2021 that on the COVID front, or was that sort of that stay in the human pharma side?
Not COVID specifically. I mean, I think it was interesting to think about whether the animal reservoir for SARS-CoV-2 was going to become a problem for human infections. And obviously it was discovered early on that spike protein in cats is this, or ACE2 receptor in cats is more similar to humans than many other species. And so the concern was, okay, if cats become a reservoir, think of all the cats living in households and the potential for, so there was a little bit of that thinking, but we didn't see, epidemiological evidence that cats were a likely culprit in the spread of transmission of disease. So we didn't spend a lot of time there. But what we did do, I think, is start to think about what is SARS-CoV-2 emblematic of, and are there analogies in animals? So a coronavirus that has this sequela or consequence of this, infectivity, viral load, immune cascade challenge that comes with the onset of the respiratory disease. That's what was killing people, right? It was the inability to withstand the ravages of immune activation, more so than it was the toxins generated by your cells as a result of being infected with a virus. So that became important for us to think about in the context of animals and respiratory disease, which is a big problem in chickens. It's a big problem in pigs. It's a big problem in cows. The modalities that were pursued for the vaccines, RNA, adenoviral vector, those are all platforms that had interest rooted already in animal health. No RNA products yet. I think Elanco has the only approved DNA vaccine product in salmon, a product called Clinav for pancreatic disease, and it's marketed in Norway. So really the challenge on the animal health side has always been the concern about integration of the nucleic acid content into the cells of the animal and then proliferation in the environment. With RNA, you're less concerned about that, but you could have a reverse transcriptase that could encode for DNA, and all of a sudden you're putting viral elements in human cells, and if they proliferate, what does that mean? So what I was fascinated by is what the journey from a regulatory standpoint it took for us to get the first DNA vaccine approved, to now, in the face of a pandemic, really the first RNA product ever approved without really any sort of longitudinal information about what it does to the subject that's receiving it. I understand why, as public health officials and government officials, you want to do that, because it's the fear of the unknown of the virus is greater than the fear of the unknown of the vaccine, right? But at the same time, it's early days, right? For what we're going to learn, and it might well be that animal health is one of the places we actually sort out exactly the kind of immune response you get from an RNA vaccine, right? We're learning as we unpack COVID, it starts with obviously IgG antibodies and IgM, and then you get T cell, right? And then CD4, CD8. So we're starting to learn exactly how the immune system adapts to the exposure of a virus. These are all things we know quite well in these animals. And so I think there's a great opportunity to learn and accelerate these technologies, and then a good challenge around regulatory process. If we can get an RNA vaccine approved in 9 months, right, in 2020, why does it take 5, 7, 8 years in the 3 decades prior to that? to get a vaccine approved, either on the human side or on the animal side. So maybe there is some learning about, in essence, what we do when the stakes are really high, and all of a sudden we relax some of the regulations and the restrictions that were standing in our way before.
Yep.
I think that deserves dialogue. I'm not saying one is right or the other is wrong, but a tremendous learning opportunity that allowed us to lower the barrier to entry significantly in the face of COVID, when there's other diseases that are pressing challenges in their own context, where that regulatory burden is still very, very high.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
What, Aaron, at the beginning, we mentioned a little bit about the separation that you experienced in animal pharma in terms of disease, but then also what you term potential. And we can think, obviously, there's potential. I want that racehorse to run longer and faster. I want those cows to make more milk and so forth. I want to run faster. I don't want to make more milk. But as humans, we are deal with disease, but we also have want more potential. And a very hot topic that we've been focusing a lot on the show lately has been in the area of longevity or health span, the ability to compress morbidity in life. And I've done a couple of shows on people studying dogs and how we can via sort of certain therapeutic interventions give our pets a couple extra years in our life. Have you seen a lot of action in your business development role or in other parts of the business on just general longevity, aging, health span in whether it's companion animals or some of these other livestocks?
I'd say first, more so the interest in it, I think, is greater on the pet side.
Okay.
And largely because the programmed life of especially if it's a meat producing animal, right? You actually want that time to be as short as possible, not longer. Right. If you can grow in that shorter time, right?
Sure, okay.
Because the maintenance cost of keeping an animal longer just to get a little more meat starts to weigh into the economic situation of the livestock producer. Dairy cattle may be a different story. We want a good milking cow to be around for as long as we can keep it around.
Sure.
Right? But for fish and chicken and broilers, right? Sure. Layers, again, I want egg producing hens to produce as many eggs as they can, and keeping them around longer while they're still vital is a good idea. So there might be some insights on the livestock side, but on the pet side, it's I don't think the industry or the veterinary practice has turned as much to that, because they're still fighting diseases that are shortening the lives dramatically, right? As opposed to saying, take a healthy animal and allow it to live a few more years longer. Right. So those are, kidney disease is the #1 killer in cats. We don't have good solutions for kidney disease. Diabetes in cats is often underdiagnosed and it's very hard to treat, because, anybody who has a cat that hasn't been declawed, try to hold that cat and give it an injection twice a day. Right? It's there's a threat to the human's experience in that situation. And the availability of a kitten or a puppy also factors into how long someone will keep an animal, right? The end of life decision for animals is often the start of life decision for an adoption, right? And so we don't have the same thing. When our grandmother gets old, we're not going to put her down and go get a new grandma, right? But with a dog, you believe, and having been someone who's had to experience this, you feel like you're doing the right thing at the end of life of an animal. And then you open this new discovery of this new family member. And that's in the total cycle, that's a good experience for people generally, right? It doesn't prove to be that bad experience. So the motivation maybe isn't there the same way, is what I'm getting at. But I do think that the animals, the pets as translation opportunities for the human side and vice versa is important. And I do believe that if somebody had a healthy pet that could be kept alive longer, they would do it, all things being equal, right? And so I think there'll be more interest there, but I don't know if there's going to be a leading edge kind of science take place there, except for maybe the efficiency of studying in the context of a cat or dog, which lives a shorter life, so you can get to an answer quicker, right, as to whether you've lengthened it in some meaningful way and whether that biology could apply on the human side. So I think you'll see some energy there, but it's probably going to be a function of how much interest gets taken on the human side for things like longevity and senescence and aging well, and then people who have the insight to say, well, maybe we ought to look at this in animals.
Got it. Got it. Aaron, now coming back to you, obviously amazing career, human pharma, animal pharma, startup, the whole sort of gamut of R&D, business development, commercialization. It's 2020. Well, we're getting this word 2022 now. What excites you looking at the industry now, whether it's in the human side or animal? What are you going to be looking at personally, whether it's for your business or just for your own interest, looking at the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I think content and business models, I think it's sort of two different compartments here for the answer to that question, Ira. Content-wise, we're in a golden age, I think, of biological discovery and understanding. This is a chemist talking, and I if I had to do it all over again, I would probably go study biology. Now, I think I've said this to you before. Every chemist believes they're a biologist, but not every biologist believes they're a chemist. So, but setting that aside, I think just amazing what we're learning on what happens in cells, how to understand that, engineer that, right? We're moving from discovery to design in some cases, right? Gene editing and molecular design, all of these things, we are getting closer to making stuff happen and farther away from just observing and explaining what happened than ever. And I believe that that's going to unlock so much more potential, whether it's human health or animal health or crop science or material science for that matter. I just think we're getting to the fundamentals of understanding, first principles of how things work at an atomic and molecular level, and we're able to recapitulate that into make something work a certain way, and that's very exciting. I think from a business model standpoint, I think the uncoupling of the three necessary ingredients is just going to proliferate. I think we're going to see more and more models where nobody owns all three, right? Somebody owns one or two, and we're in an environment where there's just tremendous amount of risk capital available in the world that can be put to work in more efficient ways for different kinds of startups, different kinds of ventures. I could imagine corporates and private equity coming together to take a shared risk in one area. So I just see a lot of business model engineering then that's gonna fall out of just our understanding of what's the best way to display risk in an economic ecosystem. Couple that with this biological ecosystem that we have this richer understanding for. What happened in software over the last 30 years is probably going to happen in biology in the next 30 years.
It's going to be an interesting time, and it's going to be interesting for you being at the epicenter of all of it and sort of seeing this all play out. But really exciting stuff, Aaron. And I appreciate you taking us for this journey, not just through your career, but through the visions and what's going to be transpiring, because it is so exciting. And for everybody that is going to be listening to this particular episode on our podcast or watching on the YouTube channel, you've been listening to Aaron Schacht, Executive Vice President, Innovation, Regulatory, and Business Development at Elanco Company. Aaron, once again, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk and educate us for a little while. Thanks to everything you've been doing there on both the human and animal side. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow through what you've been up to. It's very exciting stuff.
No, it's been a great privilege, Ira. And let's do this again in a couple of years and see what's transpired.
Absolutely. Absolutely.